In the autumn of 2001, one of the most admired companies in America simply ceased to exist. Not gradually, not with warning. In a matter of weeks, an energy giant valued in the tens of billions of dollars was reduced to 26 cents a share, and roughly $74 billion in shareholder value evaporated as if it had never been real. And here is the unsettling truth at the center of this story. Much of it never was. Enron was, at its height, the seventh largest company in the United States. It reported more than $100 billion in annual revenue. It employed about 30,000 people. For 6 consecutive years, Fortune magazine crowned it the most innovative company in America, and in the year 2000, it was named one of the best places in the country to work. Its stock had climbed from around $10 a share to a peak near 90. Its market capitalization sailed past $60 billion. Wall Street loved it. Analysts recommended it. Ordinary employees poured their retirement savings into it, buying Enron stock inside their own 401k accounts because they believed in the company they worked for. And then it was gone. When Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on December 2, 2001, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. Thousands of employees lost their jobs in a single stroke. Many lost their pensions along with them, wiped out because their retirement funds were tied to a stock that had become worthless almost overnight. To make the wound deeper, more than 20,000 of those employees had their 401k accounts frozen for about 30 days during a change of plan administrator, forced to watch, unable to sell, as their savings collapsed to nothing. So how does this happen? How does a company that appeared to be one of the most profitable enterprises on the planet turn out to have been running on profits that, in a very literal sense, did not exist? That is the mystery this series will unravel. And the answer is stranger than a simple story of theft. Because the fraud that destroyed Enron was not some secret scheme carried out in a locked room by a handful of conspirators. It was not hidden in a shredded file or a numbered offshore account, though those things existed too. The core of it was written into Enron's earnings reports. Every quarter, in plain sight, reviewed by one of the most respected accounting firms in the world, celebrated by the financial press. The fraud was baked directly into the way Enron told the world how much money it made. To understand it, you need to understand two instruments. Two accounting weapons that, when combined, allowed a company to manufacture the appearance of prosperity while the reality underneath rotted away. The first was called mark-to-market accounting. In simple terms, it let Enron book the profits it expected to earn from a deal, sometimes years into the future, as revenue today. Not money in the bank. Money it projected it would eventually receive. Sign a 20-year contract, and Enron could record 2 decades of anticipated profit in a single quarter. The Securities and Exchange Commission approved its use in 1992, and from that moment, Enron's earnings became a story the company could largely write for itself. The second weapon was even more corrosive. Off-the-books partnerships. Special entities, hundreds of them, engineered to move debt and losses off Enron's own balance sheet, so that investors never saw the true condition of the company. As long as those entities held the losses, Enron's books looked clean. And as long as Enron's stock stayed high, the whole fragile structure held together. It was a machine that depended on optimism to survive, and optimism, unlike gas or electricity, cannot be delivered forever. Over the coming episodes, we will trace these two weapons from their invention to their detonation. We will follow the paper trail through the Powers Report, the internal investigation that laid bare the deception, and through the sworn testimony delivered in the criminal trials of the men who ran the company. This is the foundational corporate fraud story of the modern era, the template that nearly every collapse since has echoed. And it begins not with a lie whispered in the dark, but with a number that was cheered in the light. To understand how Enron built a fortune out of promises, you first have to understand a phrase that sounds harmless, even technical. Mark-to-market accounting. Say it out loud, and it means nothing. But in the hands of Jeffrey Skilling, it became the engine of the entire illusion. Here is the ordinary way most companies keep score. You sell something, you deliver it, and when the money actually arrives, you record it as revenue. Simple. Cash in the door is cash on the books. Under that system, a 20-year contract to supply natural gas would pay you slowly, year after year, dollar after dollar, as the gas flowed and the invoices were settled. Skilling found that far too slow. When he arrived from McKinsey, He brought with him a different philosophy, one borrowed from the world of financial trading. Why wait 2 decades to count profits you already knew were coming? Why not value the contract the moment it was signed, estimate every dollar it would ever earn, and record all of that projected profit today, right now, as current income? That is mark-to-market. Instead of recording revenue as cash slowly arrived, Enron would book the entire lifetime profit of a long-term deal the instant the ink was dry. And crucially, the figure was based not on any market price, not on any independent measure, but on Enron's own internal estimates of what the deal would eventually be worth. Skilling pushed for this so hard that he reportedly threatened to leave if he could not have it. In 1992, he got what he wanted. The Securities and Exchange Commission approved Enron's use of mark-to-market accounting for its energy trading business. And with that single regulatory blessing, the company gained the power to conjure earnings out of forecasts. Think carefully about what this created inside the building. If your profit is calculated from your own guesses about the future, then the future becomes a dial you can turn. Sign a contract to deliver gas in the year 2010, and the value you booked in 1995 depended entirely on your assumptions. What would gas cost then? How much demand would there be? What discount rate would you apply? Every one of those numbers was an estimate, and every estimate was a lever. The Powers Report, the internal investigation later commissioned by Enron's own board, and the sworn testimony that would fill the criminal trials, laid this mechanism bare. Change an assumption about future prices, and the projected profit rose. Nudge the demand forecast upward, extend the timeline, apply a friendlier curve, and suddenly a deal that was worth $80 million was worth $120. You did not need to sell more or deliver more. You simply needed to believe more or claim to. Now attach human beings to that machine. Enron paid its executives and its traders on the profits they booked, not on cash collected, not on gas delivered, on the paper earnings recorded the moment a contract was signed. So the incentive was obvious and irresistible. Sign the deal. Assign the most optimistic assumptions you could justify, and some you couldn't. Record the instant earnings. Collect the bonus. Repeat. A culture bloomed in which the deal itself mattered more than whether the deal ever worked. Traders competed to close contracts, because closing was payday. Whether the gas ever flowed profitably 20 years later was somebody else's problem, in some other decade, long after the bonus had cleared. But here is the trap hidden inside the miracle, the flaw that doomed the whole design. When you pull all of tomorrow's profit into today, tomorrow arrives empty. You have already spent it. That contract will not generate fresh earnings next quarter because you already counted them. So to show growth, to keep the stock climbing, you needed a new deal next quarter, larger than the last. And then a larger one after that. It was a treadmill, and it only ran in one direction. Faster. Each quarter demanded bigger contracts, bolder assumptions, more aggressive forecasts, just to stand still. And when the real deals ran out, when there simply weren't enough legitimate contracts to feed the machine, the only remaining option was to invent them. Mark-to-market did not begin as fraud, but it built the road that led there directly. By the year 2000, that road led straight into a business that barely existed. Enron had announced, with the confidence it brought to everything, that it would build a nationwide high-speed broadband network. Fiber optic cables stretching across the country. Bandwidth bought and sold like natural gas, like electricity, like any other commodity that could be traded on an Enron desk. The internet was exploding. Investors were desperate for exposure to it. And Enron, the company that could make markets out of anything, promised to make one out of the very pipes that carried the digital future. The centerpiece of this vision was a partnership with Blockbuster. The idea sounded almost prophetic. Video on demand, streamed into your home over Enron's fiber network. Movies delivered instantly, without a trip to the store. In 1999 and 2000, this was science fiction dressed up as a business plan. The two companies signed a 20-year deal. And here is where the machine did what it was built to do. Enron looked at this partnership, this thing that had produced no working product, no paying customers, no proven technology, and it calculated what the deal might earn over its lifetime. The figure came out to around $110 million in projected profit. And under mark-to-market accounting, Enron booked that number as revenue. Immediately. Present tense. Money that would supposedly arrive over 20 years, recorded as earnings today, from a service no customer could actually buy. The problem was not that the technology was slow. The problem was that it did not work. The streaming infrastructure of that era simply could not deliver what the partnership promised. The pipes were not ready. The software was not ready. The whole vision was years, maybe a decade, ahead of reality. Blockbuster walked away. The deal collapsed. The video-on-demand service never launched in any meaningful way, and it generated essentially nothing. No product, no customers, no cash. But the profit had already been counted. It was already sitting in Enron's numbers, already helping the stock climb, already telling Wall Street that Enron Broadband was another triumph in a company that apparently could not stop winning. When Skilling stood in front of analysts and talked about the broadband division, he spoke of a market worth tens of billions of dollars. The stock responded. The market rewarded the story, not the substance, because at Enron the story had become the substance. And this is the trap tightening around itself. Understand the psychology of it. Enron had convinced the world it was the smartest company in the room, and Skilling had convinced the world he was the smartest man in it. That reputation was not decoration. It was the entire foundation of the stock price. The moment Enron reported ordinary results, the moment it grew like a normal company instead of a miracle, the spell would break. Analysts demanded relentless double-digit growth. The persona demanded that every quarter beat the last. And mark-to-market offered the perfect drug because it let the company keep selling the future, not what it had earned, but what it swore it would earn someday. The trouble with promising the future is that eventually the present has to arrive. Real cash has to move. Bills have to be paid. And a gap was opening, wider every quarter, between the earnings Enron reported and the money it actually collected. The company was recording profits from deals that produced nothing. It was booking billions from contracts whose value existed only in a spreadsheet's assumptions. On paper, Enron was thriving. In its bank accounts, the story was very different. That gap could not simply be announced. You cannot tell the market that your celebrated broadband deal earned nothing, that your projected profits are evaporating, that your assets are worth a fraction of what you claimed. Not when the entire stock price depends on the illusion of unstoppable success. The losses were real. They were accumulating, and they had to go somewhere the world could not see them. So Enron needed a place to hide the truth. It needed a mechanism to make bad assets and mounting losses simply disappear from the balance sheet. And a man named Andrew Fastow was about to build exactly that. Andrew Fastow was young, ambitious, and remarkably clever with numbers. As Enron's chief financial officer, he was tasked with keeping the company's finances looking as impressive as its reputation. And he did so with an invention that would become the beating heart of the Enron scandal, the special purpose entity. To understand what Fastow built, you have to understand a loophole in American accounting rules. If a company creates a separate entity, and at least 3% of that entity's capital comes from independent outside investors, then that entity does not have to appear on the parent company's books. It stands apart. Its debts are its own. Its losses belong to someone else. On paper, at least. That 3% rule was designed for legitimate business purposes. Fastow saw it as a doorway. If he could set up outside partnerships that technically satisfied the requirement, Enron could sell its troubled assets and mounting losses into those partnerships. The bad numbers would leave Enron's balance sheet. The company could even record the sales as gains, boosting reported profits. It was, in theory, financial magic. Turn a liability into an asset with a single transaction. But there was a problem, and it was a serious one. Who would run these outside partnerships? Who would put up the money and manage the deals? Fastow's answer was breathtaking in its audacity. He would. He created a series of partnerships, the most notorious of which he named LJAM. The letters stood for the first initials of his wife, Leah, and his two sons. There was LJAM 1, and then a larger successor, LJAM 2. And these were the entities that would sit across the negotiating table from Enron, buying its unwanted assets, taking on its losses. Consider what this meant. Andrew Fastow was Enron's chief financial officer, sworn to protect the interests of Enron and its shareholders. He was also the manager and part owner of partnerships whose entire purpose was to buy things from Enron. He was on both sides of every deal. When LJM negotiated to purchase an asset from Enron, Fastow was negotiating with himself. Whatever price benefited the partnership would come at Enron's expense, and whatever benefited Enron might diminish the partnership. There was no honest way to reconcile those two roles. It was a conflict of interest so fundamental, so obvious, that it should have been unthinkable. And yet it happened. The board of directors, presented with this arrangement, did something extraordinary. They waived Enron's own code of ethics. The company's written rules explicitly prohibited exactly this kind of self-dealing by senior officers. But the board voted to set those rules aside, not once but repeatedly, allowing their CFO to run private partnerships that did business with the company he was supposed to serve. The later investigation, known as the Powers Report, would document this in damning detail, describing how the safeguards that should have stopped Fastow were simply switched off by the very people responsible for oversight. Fastow enriched himself enormously. Through the LGM partnerships and related deals, he pocketed tens of millions of dollars, money that flowed directly from his position of trust. He was profiting personally from arrangements that were quietly poisoning the company. But here is the deepest deception of all. The whole scheme rested on the pretense that these partnerships were truly independent, that they had genuinely taken the risk off Enron's hands. They had not. In many cases, the partnerships were capitalized with Enron's own stock, and Enron secretly guaranteed the deals, promising to cover losses if the partnerships got into trouble. So when LJM bought a failing asset at an inflated price, letting Enron book a gain and shed debt, the risk did not actually leave Enron. It looped around, hidden behind a curtain of paperwork, and landed right back where it started. Enron had not eliminated its problems. It had merely disguised them. And the disguise depended entirely on one fragile thing: the price of Enron stock staying high. Because the moment that price began to fall, the entire structure would begin to